Welcome, everyone, to the Sonoma Spiel. My name is Tim Zahner with the Sonoma Valley Visitors Bureau. Every week, we bring you what's happening in Sonoma. We talk about the future. We talk about what we're doing now. Today, we're going to talk about the past, or how you can come and learn about the past in the future when we have our special guest. Before I get to that, got to tell everyone it's springtime. It's beautiful outside. Go visit, see all the green hills, see the mustards, see the flowers. Go for a hike up at Sugarloaf. The flowers are out, and it's really a great time. But today, guests, I have a very special guest. Every week I say I have a very special guest. This time I mean it, because this time I mean it twice. This guest brought their own guest. So first, let me introduce Patricia Cullinan, Sonoma Valley Historical Society. Patricia, how are you?
I'm wonderful, Tim. Thank you for asking.
You bet. And we have been having some technical difficulties, so we're starting this again a second time. So just like those who are failed to learn history are doomed to repeat it, those of us that are failed to figure out the computer system are doomed to try again. So thanks for coming back and doing this historically the second time. We'll see what happens. Patricia, tell me about the special guest that you brought with you today.
Well, my special guest is now sleeping. It's Lucy, my 10-month-old Labrador Retriever.
I love her. And she's a kind of a golden color, she's not a black lab or a chocolate lab. She's a yellow lab.
Yellow lab.
Okay, so yellow lab, and she's quite well behaved.
She's very well behaved. She's a happy dog. She is a real wiggler.
Okay.
And tail thumper.
You must have taken her to the dog park or something to tire her out a little bit, or
yeah,
some
I have
trick.
Neighbors. We were talking earlier about her escaping. That's because she wants to go play with the neighbors.
Good. All right. And well, thank you, Lucy, for being so calm. And maybe she'll help us later when we do our We Get Questions segment. She can help us answer, some places
for
dogs.
That's a possibility.
It definitely is. Patricia, we were talking earlier about the Historical Society has 2 physical locations.
That's correct.
And you've got a museum called Depot Museum.
Depot Park Museum.
Depot Park Museum. So it's a museum inside the park where there's a train station. And we'll talk about that in a second. The second place you have is the Marcy House, which are archives.
Correct.
And that's inside a historical house, right? Like an actual house. Okay.
Yeah.
Most people go visit you at Depot Park Museum. Is that correct? Is that the most consumer-friendly facing? If you're a historian, you can make an appointment. And if you're into really diving into archives, they talk to you at the Marcy House.
Right.
But if you're I want to learn about just general history, they should go to Depot Park Museum.
That's correct.
Okay.
It's more questions. It's not, not something you kind of peruse. You'll probably want to spend more time at the Marcy House because we have a lot of interesting material. Like
original documents, whether it's land surveys, contracts, all the things that make up history.
Yes. Matter of fact, in a collection that we just got, and this was kind of amazing. I knew my grandfather had a business on the Sonoma Plaza. Oh. And we had in 1880, late 1880s, and we had we found those legal pads, a lined legal pad, where a woman had passed, and all the merchants in Sonoma on the plaza each contributed some money to the burial of this woman. Oh. And her, all the parts of the burial.
Okay.
And it had the names of the 2 Chinese gentlemen that that had laundries on the Sonoma Plaza. And it actually had my grandfather's name.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it was kind of a shock to see.
Was that kind of weird to see that written down in handwriting, probably?
Right. Each of the businessmen, they signed their name, and they said, Aguilon, who owned the area where the buildings where the Sunflower and the El Dorado Hotel are. He had a winery there. He was a very successful winemaker in 1870 he died in the beginning of the 20th century. And so he gave $1.50. Everybody else, they gave, $1.50.
Wow.
Money was worth a lot more.
A lot more back then, right?
But it was almost every merchant. It was
Who was this person? They were burying somebody?
I can't remember her name. She was an Italian woman who obviously was well beloved by the community and didn't have money to. Her family didn't have money
before, a lot of insurance and that's interesting. We're gonna go dark since we're already there. We have this historic cemetery we hand out maps to it. And not many places that you go to, maybe New Orleans, maybe Paris, maybe London, Boston, you go to a cemetery. People come to our cemetery. What is the attraction of this cemetery? Why should someone come to Sonoma and go up to the cemetery up on the hill there?
Well, we have so many interesting people buried there. Miss Captain Boyce from Boy Springs.
Oh, Boyce Hot Springs, okay.
You know, Vallejo is buried there. You would be surprised how many people come and look for their relatives. There's just a lot of famous people there. We have the only... And I don't know where it is. I don't know if anyone knows where it is. It's a burial of a Revolutionary War soldier up there.
Wow, that person lived a long time. To be buried here in Sonoma is like to fight in the war and then to die out here. I'm assuming they died out here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. His last name was Smith, and he.
Sure, it was Patricia. I see what you're doing. Yeah, here lies Smith. He was on the Mayflower, and he died here.
He wasn't that old. Yeah. Well,
that's amazing.
Yeah. You know, he could have been.
Yeah, it's absolutely possible.
It's possible.
It's absolutely possible.
Yeah.
I mean, so.
And there's documentation, but only Revolutionary War person buried west of the Mississippi, I believe.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you figure European settlement started in Sonoma around 200 years ago, and the mission was founded about 200 years ago.
Yes.
So it is definitely possible. And that of course, was the Spanish, but they were actually the Mexican Empire by that time when we were being founded.
When we were being founded,
right.
Yeah.
And now 200 years ago. That was a long time ago.
It is.
But a blink of an eye in like the grand scale of like universe time.
Right.
But for California, having a history of 200 years is pretty impressive because most of California slid off the back of the truck in the 1970s.
That's right.
And like when tract housing was built throughout every place. But aren't we like where California kind of began, official California began?
Yes. We're the location of where the Bear Flag Revolt brought... against Mexico. It was Vallejo had told his soldiers that he couldn't pay them anymore. The Mexican government hadn't been sending money for their payment, and so he said, "Hey guys, you know,
let's throw a lot in with these guys."
Well, not, and so it was unprotected. It wasn't militarily protected.
So I've heard though that we were like the tail end of the empire, both the Spanish and the Mexican Empire. Like we were the frontier. We were the end of the line.
Right.
This was not where you made your fortune. This is not where you rose up in the ranks of, the bureaucracy. You were like out there. So this wasn't really super high rate. Like Monterrey, Mexico and Monterey, California.
Right.
Those were places to be. That's where like things were happening. Well, maybe not in Monterey, California, but that was the head of Alta, California. Yeah. I've heard though, like we were the end. We were like just out there.
Yeah, but we were the end of it. But it was a successful mission.
Right.
The mission was founded here, and it was successful agriculturally.
Right. And were we founded to provide agriculture for like San Francisco? That's what I kind of heard.
Yes.
Because it was foggy down there. Their mission.
Yeah.
Hard to grow a lot of tomatoes.
Right.
In San Francisco proper.
Right.
But up in Sonoma, where everything grows, this is where we were like their agricultural mission.
Right. The native people were here for the same reason, and there was wildlife, there was abundant grasses for them, and then with the coming of the mission, then they had European agriculture, and then with the coming of the Mexicans and the secularization, which is where the Mexican government took over the mission lands.
Right.
Vallejo had 60,000 acres in his rancho.
Holy moly.
66, I think. And, they ran cattle. That was the, it was the
you
high
couldn't walk
trade.
that in a day. That's massive.
Yeah, massive.
But before the gold was discovered, the trade was like tallow and hides and cattle and things like that. There were also, going sideways here, the Russians were here.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Russians. They were up there at Fort Ross on the coast. My understanding, they had a different type of settlement, though. Like, it wasn't as permanent as, like, a mission and trying to build a town. but it was more like a fort, right?
It was a fort, but they were doing the same thing. They had in the mission system, they had something called assistencias. I have to say it fast. So assistant. It was like assistant farms.
Okay.
So Sonoma, the mission system had that in most of the missions.
Okay.
And the Russians, they had their farm in Bodega.
Interesting.
So they had several farms. Okay. And so they grew grains and potato. And
was there a lot of trade between the two organizations, a lot of contact between the two towns?
Well, Vallejo was told not, you mean
between the Mexican/Spanish outpost here and the Russians on the coast, which is, if you drive it, it's about an hour. Right. I'm sure if you hike it, it's a lot longer.
Right. Yeah. So we just had a lecture by Rosemarie Beebe and Bob Senowicz. They had translated Vallejo's History of California. It was in 5 volumes.
Okay.
It's in 2 volumes now. I have to say the 2 volumes together weigh 8 pounds.
Well, that guy was wordy. Okay.
1,500 pages.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so he was ordered not to associate with the Russians. But, you're like you were saying, we're kind of out here.
You're on the tail end of the empire.
Yeah, and so Vallejo sold grain to the Russians, and there was an economic exchange. But when Vallejo built the chapel that we know as the Mission Chapel now, the Russians supplied some of the liturgical materials for that.
Oh, okay. They kind of loaned it, or gave it.
Gave it. Yeah.
Let me also, prior to the Europeans arriving, we had, I believe, the Pomo, the Miwok, Wappo. And were they all kind of meeting in this area, or was it like an ebb and flow, or were there more established communities around that time?
There were a few communities, but this is kind of a meeting. Not that they were meeting, but their territorial sites were intersecting here.
Yeah, because the Pomo were a little more out to the coast, I think, and I think the Wappo were closer to Napa. I could be totally wrong about this.
Yeah, and there's the coast Miwok, and then the Pomo are kind of northwest.
Okay.
And the Wappo, yes, it's sort of more northerly than Napa.
Like Lake County or something like that, or
no, it came to here though.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there were the Patwin.
Oh, right. Thank you. Okay.
So there were a lot of Patwin in the mission here.
Oh, from the Sassoon. That's where we get the Sassoon Valley. Okay, which is, if you drive to Sassoon Valley, it's about 30 minutes away from here, I think, or maybe less, if you go through Napa and cut over.
Yeah.
So there were all these different groups living here. There were the Spanish here, the Russians here. Then the Anglo settlers from the west came out, or from the east came out, excuse me. And I heard some would come around the Horn on boats to San Francisco and come up. And then there were some that came overland, probably more when the railroads and gold was discovered, was probably more of people started running out here. But before, there wasn't a lot of Anglo settlement, right? Right.
Well, we all know about the the Donner Party that ended up at Sutter's Fort.
That did not end well. Speaking of a winter with a lot of snow, the one we just had, yes, the Donner Party.
Yeah,
they got stuck. For those who don't know, they got stuck in the snows and resorted to cannibalism, and it was a really sad story. But a lot of their settlers were settled in the Bay Area. Right, they were trying to come here, right, the Oregon country.
Right, and they 2 of the Donner daughters lived in Sonoma, and so you had a lot of overland in wagon trains, and some people came from Oregon. That was one of the routes that people got here. Not so much the southern part, but it was people were on the move.
That was a time of great change.
Yes, it was.
There was a lot of revolutions in Europe, so people were leaving Europe. There was gold discovery. It's all the stuff happening. On the topic of change and moving trains, and the exhibit you guys have called the Resorts of Sonoma Valley. we were talking earlier that people used to come up here via train, and before that by a boat and Stagecoach to resorts, to hotels. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes people say, oh, tourism in Sonoma Valley is kind of new. You surprised me by saying it's been going on since like 1840. People have been coming up here to get some sun.
I don't know about 1840, okay, but definitely the late 1840s.
Late 1840s.
Yeah.
People were coming up here to take the waters, the hot springs. How many little hotels or resorts or getaways were there? Like, what was that like back then in Sonoma?
Well, gosh, I wish I had I could remember the number. So what people did is to advertise their resorts. Even in the late 1800s, they had postcards made, maybe the early 1900s. And so we have this vast collection of postcards of all these different locations. There were, and people came for different reasons. Mm-hmm. Now people come for wine. Right. People used to come for hunting and fishing a lot.
So this was the hunting for the San Francisco people, Oakland people, mm-hmm. the city. Mm-hmm. They'd come up here on a boat, mm-hmm. and then by a horse carriage or train,
right,
to go hunting for deer.
Yeah.
Okay. And like birds and stuff like that?
Birds, yeah. Huh. So down in the marshes, there were ducks and all kinds of waterfowl. There were, there's all kinds of different kinds of fishing, saltwater fishing.
Oh, right, because it's kind of brackish water where the bay comes, mm-hmm. and there's salt water.
Sturgeon,
whatever. So they would come up here and go fishing and like go for a Sonoma hunting holiday.
Yes.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Like today.
Right.
No one would do that. I mean, you can still fish. People still go fishing.
Right.
But I've never heard anyone like
hunting.
Living in San Francisco, like I'm going to go bag a deer over there in Glen Ellen. I mean, you can, I'm sure, but no one does that.
Yeah. No one does.
You can get a wild pig. You go to the hills with a boar. Well, did those boars, did the Spanish release those pigs that became the wild boars?
Well, I don't know.
Because they're a big problem.
Yeah.
They're delicious, too. They're a big, delicious problem if you make them into ravioli and you know what you're doing. But they do tear up everyone's, and they're not native here, and they demolish everything.
Wild boar ragu.
Oh, so good.
With ravioli.
With ravioli, thank you. Yeah. Let me ask you these resorts then, because you have an exhibit. It's called Getting Away from It All, The Resorts of Sonoma Valley. It's an exhibit at Depot Park. It ends in May, but you'll have the archives and you can always do it again.
Right.
And it talks about how people would come up here for special getaways.
Yes.
And there were lodges and inns and hotels. Some of those have probably burned down or, they probably weren't built that well and they were gone. Are there any existing resorts from that time that are still around?
Well, at Jack London, I guess that one burnt too.
You could do an exhibit. Well, that one's gone too. So
there are some of the buildings,
Patricia, your exhibit, you should have been here. There are, I think, like the Fairmont, for example, is now the Fairmont Sonoma Mission Inn. Before that, it was the Sonoma Mission Inn. Mm-hmm. Before that, it was probably the Mission Inn. I don't know. That was built more than 100 years ago, if I recall.
Correct.
On the place where there's geothermal pools, and they still use a geothermal activity. And I think, and obviously it's not from the 1880s, but there is one which is now a senior living facility in the Springs. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's the Boys Hotel, or I can't remember the name of it.
No, it's the Agua Caliente.
Okay.
And, because it was associated with the hot springs there.
Okay.
Don't forget, there's the hot pools very close to that.
So there are hot springs underneath Sonoma.
Correct.
Sonoma Valley mainly, but Sonoma. Yeah. Are they still there?
Absolutely. So the Fairmont has them, and if you walk Warm Springs, which is the creek that follows Warm Springs Road, the temperature changes.
I've heard there are seeps of hot water that come out of like the mud and the rocks.
Yeah.
And supposedly there's these stories of people having their backyard pools that can come out, like the water, can go sideways for a little bit and pop up. So if you go around the springs, there might be private geothermal pools.
Yeah.
Do not go into their backyards. And we're talking mud seeps. We're not talking beautiful pools.
I know where there's a couple.
Oh, you know a couple. Oh, I like that.
But they were all the way down, all the way down the valley and up the valley. Yeah. And actually, there was a place called Lawrence Villa that was very close to well, it's where the patch is now, just above where the patch is, and that was geothermal until 1906 at that earthquake, and it went to...
It shifted it.
And
the patch, for those who don't know, is a farm. They're the farmer's market.
Yeah.
And on Friday, they have wonderful vegetables. They have like 2 main farms here in the Sonoma Valley. I didn't know that was geothermal right there. That's amazing. What happened in 1906?
The earthquake.
Which one?
The San Francisco earthquake.
The 1906 earthquake. And
which is last week was its anniversary.
It was. And it shifted a lot of things along the California coast because, and listeners, just to let you know, the fault line is not in Sonoma. It is to our west through Marin, and it does go along the Sonoma County coastline, the San Andreas Fault. There are faults everywhere. And there's a fault in our stars, if you're Shakespearean. But the major fault was to the west of us. And a lot of things shifted, especially out there. If you look in Marin at Point Reyes, there's a fence that historically, there's a great photo of it moving like 20 feet or something really interesting.
Oh, yes.
And I heard a lot of the springs shifted over. Or got capped or something like that. And it's the same springs or the same system that's up in Geyserville. And where the geysers are, they get a lot of power. It's like this huge underground geothermal volcanic thing. Is that a good explanation?
This area is volcanic. That's why the geothermal. And up on the Glen Oaks Ranch, you can see, which is the Sonoma Land Trust. It's one of their properties. There is obsidian up there.
Oh, okay.
From
geothermal activity.
Well, not geothermal,
but volcanic.
Volcanoes,
You know, this is where...
Kaboom!
We need to do a new thing called Ask a Geologist. They come in and tell us stuff. You're not a geologist, are you?
No, but, there is a fault that runs up there through the... the Sonoma... it's the park up there in Glen Ellen.
In Glen Ellen?
Yeah.
Not the Jack London State Park.
No, the other one, the
Sonoma Valley Regional Park?
Yes, Sonoma Valley Regional Park. You can see a fault line.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's neat.
And if you go up to Fort Ross,
where the Russians were.
Where the Russians were, there's a historic vineyard up there, or not vineyard, a historic fruit orchard.
Oh, right.
And you can see the fault.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
Because it does go right out the coastline there. It kind of shoots out there.
Yeah, there's like a cliff at the back of the orchard, and it's like it's kind of eerie, if you think about it.
Well, I was down in San Juan Bautista. I was driving down with my son to go look at colleges. And the same thing, it seems like the Spanish decided to build all their missions on faults because every mission you go at, there's like an exhibit where the San Andreas Fault goes along, which maybe it was a natural rift to put a road on or something. But it is kind of neat to see that. It's a thing there. Let's move away from earthquakes.
But you asked questions about resorts, and they were everywhere.
Okay, so it wasn't just like downtown Sonoma, which people think of the plaza, 8-acre plaza, but they were up and down the whole valley and down the hunting cabins, I imagine, for waterfowl were south of town in the Carneros area.
Right, even Jack London was State Park. His wife in the 30s had a basically bed and breakfast there. And one of the reasons people came here is because it was good food. And there was plenty of fresh air. Right. It wasn't... The city was polluted and dirty.
The city, back when you would use coal to heat your house or wood, that's a lot of like asthma-inducing particulates. There weren't any pollution controls, right? We had no electric heaters. So the cities were kind of dirty.
They were dirty.
They would throw their sewage out in the street. Boy, it's really, I'm glad we didn't have to do San Francisco tourism, huh? So people came up here, huh?
People, and sometimes the husband would work in the city and come up on the weekends. He'd leave his wife and children.
I see. Okay.
So for the health benefits, people were really into health.
Right.
And, obviously we're all into health now, but, people were conscious of the unhealthy rather and looked for health.
Place to get away. That's interesting. Yeah. I have here, you have, if I joined the Sonoma Valley Historical Society, which everyone should, you guys send out a neat little newsletter.
We do.
Is like all this information and things in here. You have a neat thing here about the Sonoma Overlook Trail. Being 20 years old, there's a hill above the plaza, above the city, that had been slated for some kind of development.
Right.
And there was a great hue and a cry. And instead, this great trail was developed. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me, like, what was that, a quarry at one time, or what was up there?
Well, there was quarry and a dump. That's where the dump.
Oh, the old town dump was up there.
It was probably in the quarry.
Okay.
And so the Rosewood hotel group proposed a hotel on this hillside, and it was owned by the city, and there was a hue and cry, and the people of Sonoma felt that they didn't really want to look up at the lights of a resort.
Or having people looking down into your bathroom from above.
Yeah,
like,
that's
true. Hello!
That's true.
Right.
And so it's sort of like cows and not casinos that the people of Sonoma did. Do you remember that? Were you here for that?
Was that the plan to build a possible casino south around 37?
Yes.
That one? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Highway 37 is a low-lying freeway that goes across the marshlands. And there's hay fields there and cows. And there had been a proposal for a real-life statistics lab, also known as a casino, where you could go try your luck. And I think there was a revolt against that as well, if that's
right.
That's correct.
Well, and as we all know, Highway 37 has a lot of traffic on it. And so it wasn't ideal in many ways.
But was that just a train to start off with and then a stagecoach road? And then we said, Caltrans is like, I got an idea. Let's pave it. Because it's like the world's worst location for so low. 37. And it goes across the marshlands. So it's sort of like whenever I have a high tide or a lot of rain, it's right there. Was that always there, or was it just the train was first? And what happened there, Patricia? What the heck?
Well, I'm not an expert, but I do know some things.
Well, you're on a podcast, so you can become and this will be on the internet, which makes you an expert right away.
So in the 1850s, I believe. So don't quote me on this part. So there was a movement to dike the marshes.
Okay, because there's wetlands and the tide would come up and down, and it was probably pretty hard to control, right?
And there were islands that were high spots. You know, they were called islands.
Right.
And so there was movement, and I believe Senator Jones was very important in
Patricia,
that.
You just made up a guy named Smith and now Jones.
I'm
watching you, lady.
I know. Well, you can get away with a lot.
That's why you write stuff down. No, go ahead. All right, so Senator Jones.
It was Jones, though.
I believe it. I'm just teasing.
I know.
So Senator Jones had a plan to
do a lot of diking, and they were wanting to make more fertile land. You know, they did a lot in the San Joaquin Valley because, as we know, that was a big swamp. Right. And Lake Tulare is going back to...
It's back. Nature's like, ha, 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 joke's on you. Yeah. And
so they did diking. Actually, an interesting fact, everybody says that Harasti was the, father of the wine business here, but he did a lot of diking. He had a lot of Chinese labor. The Chinese people did a lot of diking, and that was actually a bit before the railroads.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah.
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
Well, it could have been. Because
it was because 1860 started the railroad.
And they were fleeing a lot of unrest in China.
You're right.
So
absolutely.
Would come here. And so Harasti, I overpronounced his name. I mispronounce it every time. Augustin Harasti. Anyway, this guy claimed to be a count.
Yeah, that wasn't true.
Right. He also was like a weird land speculator. He also smuggled. This was true. He smuggled grapes out of France. To California, but actually stopped in like New York and Wisconsin and Ohio, like on the way over, trying to figure out where to start his winery. And he's credited with the first commercial winery in the United States is in California. Like, so that's the birthplace. That's what the Tourism Bureau writes in their marketing stuff. That Buena Vista Winery.
You see my eyes roll?
Well, here's the issue, right? Because like a lot of grapes, like European grapes, were also planted in the East Coast when people first landed there. The problem is they were terrible. Don't say anything. You don't have to. No, they were great. Like Jefferson, everyone's like, Jefferson planted grapes, and Ohio River Valley has grapes.
Right.
But what Harasti, I guess, supposedly did is found that some sort of wonderful grape variety that you could plant here and then do a commercial winery instead of just winery for personal consumption. He would sell it. Is that right? Am I making this all up? Tell me the truth. Tell me the truth.
There were wineries in Southern California.
We don't count that, though, because it's Southern California. Yeah, well, obviously, the Spanish brought their missionary wine, the Sacramento wine, right?
Yeah, they had vineyards. Every mission had a vineyard, but actually the first commercial vineyard in Sonoma was an Indian named Viviano.
Interesting.
And he has a land grant that is essentially the same place that Harasti bought for Buena Vista. And so he bought that property.
So Harasti did a little save as. He took this guy's land or winery and said...
it had passed through to a couple of other people
so
in the meantime, but the original grapes that he planted, Harasti bought a vineyard. It was an established vineyard.
Story of him like sneaking a bunch of grapes in his jacket and coming through the... It's like the typical California story of rebirth and kind of embellishment. Mm-hmm. Because if you go to Buena Vista, there's a crocodile in the tasting room. It's dead. It's a stuffed crocodile, okay? And it's to commemorate, supposedly he died in Nicaragua.
No, that's true.
And he was trying to this was like the time of like American interventionism in Central America, and he was trying to like start a new business down there or foment revolution or all of the above. And he went out in the swamps and he had a disagreement with an alligator or a crocodile, and he never came back.
I think he was actually trying to cross a river.
And why? Just because?
And he actually, his wife was with him.
Oh dear! Did she see what happened?
I'm not sure about that part of the story, but he did get eaten by a crocodile. Okay. But I believe it was because he had financial issues here, and so he was looking for new fertile grounds.
Okay, and so he went to like a place where there's malaria and yellow fever and crocodiles. You do what you got to do.
These people were real adventurers.
Right.
Imagine the people who came across the plains, to California in a wagon train.
Right.
With your, pregnant wife and a couple of kids. And
right. I know a lot about this because I'm a child of the 80s, and we played a game called Oregon Trail on the computer, and everyone died of dysentery or a broken leg. That's what would happen. You play a game, you could never finish it because you died. And basically, it just hammered home to anyone of my age. Any Gen Xers listening know, if you cross the plains in a wagon, most of you die. And so it seemed like this was a really arduous, hard journey. And you had to be extremely hardy, adventurous, or maybe naive about what you were going to face, right? Anyway, it's just... This is terrible, Patricia. Where are we going with this?
No, it's actually kind of interesting. People, they didn't quite die like that. People were a lot more self-sufficient.
That's true.
This was the progeny of the people who cleared a lot of the East Coast for farming. Right. And, there were no luxuries. If you wanted heat in your house, you had to burn wood that you had to cut the tree down and saw it into the right size. So those people, they were able to fix their wagons. And
they were carpenter, mechanic, doctor, hunter.
Yeah.
I wonder if they got here, they realized, the weather patterns in the East where it rains regularly. And then you end up in the semi-arid American West.
Right.
Were they like, oh my God, this is not what the postcard said. And then they had to wait 100 years for irrigation channels to be built and massive public works structures. Because, this would be a hard place to have large-scale agriculture without really good
but I think a lot of times the creeks, the creeks were, there wasn't so much pressure on the groundwater, so creeks ran in the summertime.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay.
Yeah.
And you were growing food just for your family. You weren't doing a lot of export.
Well, there's a lot. The missions, they built elaborate irrigation systems.
Oh, okay.
Bringing the water from water sources quite a ways away.
Oh, interesting.
It was super sophisticated. It wasn't as primitive.
Okay.
It was different.
It was different. I would like to see an exhibit on irrigation of like the 1890s, because that'd be kind of neat. I mean, it'd be dorky.
It was way sophisticated then.
Really?
They had, pumps and...
Right. I guess the 1890s wasn't that long ago.
Right. I have a great book I can loan you on the mission San Antonio, which was one of the first missions.
Okay.
And they had water wheels and... to generate, to
they must
grind.
have figured it out, to live here, and their source of power and everything like that.
Yeah, I mean, just when you think of it, and the Renaissance was in the mid 14th century, so this was like 400 years after Leonardo da Vinci.
Right.
So he was, figuring out, well, he was in 1500, right?
I think so. Yeah.
And so. He
was
figuring out airplanes and stuff.
So a water wheel wasn't too far to go.
No.
Obviously, if the Romans had figured out aqueducts and the Chinese and the Indian, all throughout the world, people had figured it out. So you're right. I guess I shouldn't be that amazed.
Yeah. So I want to. You were talking about dysentery, and I want to.
Oh right. Let's go back to dysentery, Patricia. Everyone wants to talk about that.
No. One of the things that there was great prejudice against the Chinese. And one of the things that amazes me is a lot of people consider them too clean because they bathed every day. Oh. And they didn't have a problem with dysentery because they drank a lot of tea, which means they boiled the water for the tea.
Oh, interesting.
So
they probably had an earlier understanding of germ theory than we did. Which
I mean,
that's interesting.
It's interesting and it's positive and it's like.
Well, you guys. Speaking of which, the Chinese that came here, you had a great exhibit of banners around the plaza.
We did
that featured two of the Chinese business people that have businesses on the plaza.
That's right.
And I know we're trying to build a monument or some kind of memorial. A ting, in Depot Park. Or near Depot Park, commemorating the Chinese immigrants that came here, the laborers both for the digging caves and the winery, the railroad, you mentioned for the waterworks.
Right.
And that's a big part of, most California school kids hear that story, but maybe in the rest of the United States, they don't understand that, not all immigration was European-based.
Right.
On the West Coast, it was, Chinese and then Japanese were coming here to do farming and agriculture and labor.
Right.
And I would love to see that ting completed because I think that'd be a great exhibit.
We have an exhibit at the Depot Park Museum. I think in our first iteration of this show, we talked about the Depot Park Museum.
Which is a former train station rebuilt just a block and a bit north of the plaza.
And we have an exhibit on the Chinese here in Sonoma because at one time, a third of the town was Chinese.
Oh, okay.
And I want to personally debunk the theory that the Chinese were forced into tunnels in Sonoma for two reasons. One, they had a lot of businesses, which are on insurance maps. And the other thing, Sonoma has high groundwater, so there
weren't any tunnels to live in. I think the tunnel story comes from there's a secret tunnel on the corner of First Street East and Spain Street that's underneath supposedly a restaurant that was used during Prohibition, and it was dug as a cave, and it's a fountain. I don't know.
Actually, the creek runs under there.
That's what I think it actually is.
And there's drainage. You were talking about public works in some context previously. The WPA did lots of work. The Works Project...
Works Progress
Administration.
Yeah, in the 1930s.
In the 1930s, and they did a lot of work in Sonoma, particularly, but in Sonoma County, they built a fire station out in Boys Hot Springs. but they did a lot of drainage, and we're still using some of those systems.
Interesting.
And one of them is draining the creek that I think it's Arroyo Seco that goes under Broadway.
Okay.
And that's under Maya, the restaurant, restaurant.
That's why there's been continual work down there. Okay. There's kind of an irony that there's a creek called Arroyo Seco, which means dry canyon or whatever, dry creek bed. Except when it's not. Patricia, this is fascinating, and the history and stuff. I'm just going to do a quick rapid fire. Just talk about some of the history stuff in Sonoma Valley, because people do like history. But we have the Depot Park Museum. That's where you guys are located. Your main thing for visitors, 270 First Street West. If you go on Friday mornings, the farmers market is right there. On Saturdays and Sundays, the museum is open. You can go see it and stuff like that. Great exhibits. We also have the Marcy House Archives and Research Center. You need to make an appointment to go there. Is that correct? 'Cause that's really
people can drop in, but it's if you. People do drop in if they my family was here, If
you have historical interest of a specific
historical interest.
Right. Because I've been in there with you, and you gave me this tour that, I thought I was going to be there for 30 minutes. We were there for 2 hours. We had the white gloves on. We were looking at all sorts of neat maps and crazy photos. That place is amazing, right?
It is.
And it's so funny because stuff that at the time, I think we were mentioning that people thought was just daily, here's a map. 100 years later, this is really interesting. And you go and get our visitor guides every year. Right. And you say, this is part of the historical record.
Right.
And you put us in the, the tourism and hospitality box or something, which I love. So the Marcy House Archives and Research Center, which is on First Street West as well. We have the Sonoma Women's Club.
Yes.
Which is a beautiful building on First Street East. And it's like a craftsman style house, I think.
Yes.
Beautiful porch. And it's just a neat place. It's a beautiful venue. It's one of those historical spots that you can go to. It's open during special events. You can have a wedding there, too. You can rent it if you want, which is a neat place. And Jack London State Historic Park. So now I'm going out of the city of Sonoma. Beautiful park. It's where Jack London and his wife Charmian, writers, both of them, adventurers. He was an agricultural dilettante. He put a lot of money into trying different things. He's buried there with his wife, and it's a neat kind of history spot there. We have a lot of historical things. We have the mission, as we mentioned before. So we have a lot.
And it's the 200th anniversary of the mission.
200th founding of the mission.
First, let me talk about the Women's Club.
Sure.
Sonoma is what it is because of the Women's Club.
Absolutely.
They did plaza improvement. They did education. They had the first library. They funded or helped fund the where the Visitors Bureau now, which was the Carnegie Library. The water infrastructure, all those public services that makes the town a great place. Right.
And it still exists. The Sonoma Women's Club is still existing social/philanthropic club.
Right.
When you start walking around town and look at all the plaques, they were instrumental in so many parts of the their infrastructure, but they're really community projects,
right?
That we're all part of.
Yes.
And you don't notice it though until you start looking. You're like, wow, they are everywhere. But I guess they've been around a while.
They are. So. I think 1901.
Okay.
One of they donate. You had talked previously about if we're still getting donations, and
of archives and random things, clippings and boxes.
Yes. And like you said, we pick up the advertising information from the Visitors Bureau because that gives us a snapshot of what's happening in Sonoma. But the Women's Club gave us their minute books going back to their founding, and we had them digitized by a California State Library project called California Revealed. Okay. They're on a website called the Internet Archive, so you can read all about all the work they did.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting. That's one of our other things with the Historical Society. The California State Librarian, in a brilliant move, realized that a lot of small historical societies have a lot of important history of California, and so he helps us with giving us small grants to inventory material, and then they digitize it for
You are
us.
essentially, for the California State Historical Library, a whole bunch of graduate assistants.
That's right.
With original documents. Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've been with them for about 10 years.
Okay.
And then...
That's it. We got
it.
Let me ask you. I'm gonna turn something over to you though, because we've talked about history and we've talked about the past, we've talked about the present, but I want to transition to a segment of the podcast where you help me answer questions from visitors. We get people asking us questions about things to see or do, and we have the 2 visitor centers, we have professional staff, we've got volunteers, and now Patricia, we have you, and we have Lucy to help us in this section that we call We Get Questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so first question I got. We want to meet a friend for afternoon drinks. What's a good bar to do that?
Oh, that's a bad question to ask.
That's a bad question, okay?
Well, yeah, I don't drink very much.
Wait till you get my second question. Good. So go to right, so where? Well, would you know anybody? I can help you answer that if you don't know. Okay, so one that I would recommend if you want a classic old style watering hole. Steiner's is on the plaza.
Oh, absolutely.
It smells like a classic old style wood bar. They got beer, they got drinks. It's not fancy. It's wonderful. Good history on the walls. And actually really good food. This is a weird plug. The tater tots are phenomenal. They are phenomenal. And you don't need to go to this bar to drink. You're right. This is just a place to go and just have a good time. A lot of people go there to watch football games or basketball games. But it's a good spot. And Steiner's right in the plaza. And I'm sure you know that building. It's been there for a long time. Is it the Oddfellows, the Mason building? It's one of those historic buildings. It's got something on top. It's a brick building.
It's a Masonic
temple. Thank you. That was there. So that's kind of like the classic bar, right?
Yeah.
Another one, if you want to go to a nice bar, MacArthur Place is a beautiful hotel south of the plaza.
Historic building.
It's a historic building. And the restaurant's now called Layla. And they have a beautiful bar inside there with the finest artisan craft cocktails, and it's all very chic in there, and you can sit outside. And that would be for fancier to do. And the other one would be if you want to get sparkling wine, Psy is a champagne bar. And that is around the corner from Steiner's. So you can go from Steiner's, which is like your beer, to Psy Champagne Bar and go there. But here's a second question. You ready? What can we do this afternoon that has nothing to do with alcohol? We're a group from Texas, and we don't want to go out drinking. What are some things you can do in Sonoma that don't involve drinking?
Well, you talked about the Overlook Trail being... 20 years old, and the Montini Preserve, the great views of Sonoma. You can see to San Francisco from the top of the Overlook. It's a fabulous view.
Is that a hard hike, or is it fairly easygoing? Well,
you don't want to be infirmed.
But you could probably do it in an hour and a bit if you're of moderate fitness. And I mean, flip-flops probably aren't recommended.
No flip-flops.
But sneakers are fine. Just tennis shoes. You're fine. You don't need hiking boots.
No.
You don't need ropes and crampons. You can just go up there. Okay.
Yeah, and the plaza, just hanging out in the plaza, getting, an ice cream from...
I'm going to go there after this. Go to Sweet Scoops. So good. I get the affogato a lot, which has an espresso, and then they put some stuff in there, or the Alata Chocolata, or the Wappo strawberry. You're right. Sweet Scoops is a good option.
Yeah. Okay. And just walking around the historic districts in Sonoma, there are lots of homes. I see people walking constantly. Right. Walk over to the cheese factory, the Vella's Cheese Factory.
Where they still make cheese.
And
that's on 2nd Street East.
Or walking on the bike path, which goes from... Sebastiani Winery over to McDonald's.
Yeah, over to historic McDonald's, to Highway 12, which is the beginning of the Springs.
but you pass by the Depot Park Museum.
You're right. You can see the train cars there.
And the train cars,
I like that.
And then you also go by Vallejo's home.
That's true.
We have, that's part of Sonoma State Historic Park.
Did he order that home, or how the home was assembled from a kit, right?
Some sort of kit. Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah. There were a lot of kit homes.
Old school IKEA back then, but you could get a whole house. Yeah. I was going to say, in the plaza, we do have a self-guided tree tour. You can get a map at the visitor center because there's actually trees from all around the world planted in the plaza, which has changed. I mean, that's a whole other exhibit.
Right.
People are always talking about you can't change the plaza. And I'm like, well, the plaza changes every 10 years because that's the nature of a park. Right. Whether it's a fountain's put in here or a new tree or something like that. Because you showed me some historic photos. It was just like cow poop and mud and,
and a stagecoach.
And a stagecoach, yeah, right there. But this is kind of a neat way to look at all the different types of trees and things that we have, including that palm tree that's in front of City Hall that we decorate for the holidays. And I just and people love it. Like, it's not a native tree. It's a Canary Island palm, but it's, you know what, for some people, it's like one of those things that just becomes tradition, right? It's there. So that's a good point. The plaza. Okay, good. So we got hiking and just walking around and ice cream. I like the way you go. Okay, that's good. Another question. This one came today. When is the Toscano Hotel open to visitors?
Whenever the Sonoma State Historic Park has docents for it, I believe it's on the weekends.
Right.
They do have like this little caged in area.
Right. You can kind of poke your head in and look. Okay. But on the weekends, docents, sometimes they dress in period costume.
They do.
We'll give you a great tour, especially the upstairs. And it was an actual hotel, a little different than hotels now. But a lot of Italian laborers would stay there when they were living
especially
here.
In the annex. That's
in the back. Okay. It's a great tour. It really is neat. And so, yeah, again, it's part of the Sonoma State Historic Park, which includes the Mission, the Toscano Hotel, the part of where Vallejo's house used to be, in addition to where his other house was, in addition to where his big house was over in Petaluma, in the Rancho.
Right. Well, the La Cruz Montes is still extant, so you can walk to there. But his Casa Grande, which was the house on the north side of the plaza, that burnt down in 1867, I believe.
Again, that's going to be your exhibit. Oh, that burnt
down. So there's the Mission, the barracks, the Toscano Hotel, the
servants' quarters,
and the servants' quarters, and you can't get into the servants' quarters, although they're very interesting.
Are those ever open?
No.
Are those okay? Someone asked me this: are the doors so small because people were that short, or is it because also like structurally it was hard to make them? Oh no, people were short. That's okay. That was a good question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That should have been one of my questions. Were people shorter a long time ago?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, look at a lot of the immigrants, different diet.
Probably not the same amount of nutrition.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of why they left, hard life.
Yeah. So, yes, that's...
Here's a crucial question. This is an important one.
Okay.
Where was the nudist colony that was in Sonoma Valley in the 1940s?
It was past Bartholomew Park Winery.
So up by Bart Park, as local
Bart Park, yeah.
There were nudists running around the hills of Sonoma.
In the 40s.
In the 40s.
And Frank Bartholomew didn't like that. And the women's club didn't like it. So
here's a story from July 6, 1944, Associated Press, an AP Wire story. At least 200 members of a vast nudist retreat in the Valley of the Moon were called on the Office of Price Administration carpet today to explain how they reached the place on ration gasoline, some from as far away as Oregon and Southern California. So it's sort of like how Al Capone got nailed for tax evasion. The nudists in the 40s got nailed not for running around naked, which, as the good Lord intended, but because they might have used ration cards incorrectly to come here in the All-Together. So we had like a nudist utopian society or something?
Sonoma.
One more time, Patricia.
Sonoma.
I love that. Come to Sonoma. And it was just a big open field, and a big camp, and people would just run around naked. And
because it was just another example of resorts.
Really? Well, the Kingsport, Tennessee Times said, nudists must give OPA the bare facts. And then here's another one. The local Press Democrat, which is the county-wide newspaper, said, professional men housewives found flitting about Hilltype Elysium from all over state. Flitting about. That's kind of funny. So it kind of maybe goes back to your story about wellness and health and stuff like that, because there was a movement of getting some sun,
right,
and in the altogether. And I think that's really interesting that was here. The Sunoma, kind of a history of all the utopian societies we used to have here, from the Brotherhood of New Life, which is just over the hill in Santa Rosa, where they have the Paradise Ridge wineries there now. There was the Star-Crossed group, which is like in Annapolis. There was like this, it was a secular religious group out there in the hills.
And Preston.
Yes, there was a town called Preston, right?
Yes, but it was a utopian society.
Utopian society. I think we might have had more. There probably were a lot more around here.
Oh, there were. Guerneville had one, which I can't remember the name of it right now.
But people would come up, because we were near the big city. We were on the left coast, where kind of all crazy things would happen. And it was sunny, so you could be naked. Like doing a nudist colony in San Francisco, not so fun, right? But coming up here, but I kind of like that story that we're this place where, like, dreamers and slightly unhinged / interesting people show up, and it was the kind of thing there. So, okay, thank you. It's no longer there though, right? The Sunoma. No. It's now Bart Park, or is it?
I don't know.
Property?
I don't know. It was past Bart Park.
Okay.
They accessed through Bart Park,
and that's why he was angry.
Yeah.
Was he angry about the gas rationing cards? World War II, for those who forgot.
He was annoyed.
You naked kids, get out of my field. Patricia, this has been great. You have been a wonderful guest, so thanks for coming on. If people want more information about the Sonoma Valley Historical Society, what is the best website to go to?
www.sonomavalleyhistory.org.
Okay, SonomaValleyHistory.org is where they can find all the information. They can find about the Depot Park hours, your exhibits.
That's right.
As well as if you're interested in the Marcy House archives, they can contact you through that website.
That's correct. And they can also become a member. And digitally,
they can. You don't have to be living here in Sonoma to be a part of the Sonoma Valley Historical Society. So if you have a connection, you should join, and then you can be connected to it if it's your family history or your family future. So, yeah, you should join.
Well, some of our material is important to the state of California and the nation.
Okay.
We have a lot of amazing material.
I love it. So, Patricia, thank you so much for coming on. Good to have you here. And I'd like to remind everybody else who's listening that if you want more information about Sonoma Valley, go to sonomavalley.com. Lots of information, deals, special offers. And you know what? When this is over, why don't you take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and give us a good old rating. Give us 5 stars and tell your friends. Mom and Dad, thanks for listening. Patricia, thanks for coming. And we'll see everyone next time. Thanks a lot.